Welcome, everyone. My name is Seth Green, and on behalf of the Baumhart Center, it is a pleasure to welcome you to our first ever virtual Leading for Good 2021 conference, which, as you know, is spread over 3 weeks for extra impact this year. We are right now in the first part of this conference, the Big Idea Power Chats, and those will continue through this Thursday. And then this Friday, we are hoping all of you will be together for our main conference, which will actually take place on a virtual platform. Be fair, as you will feel like you went out for the day, even though you have no COVID risk in doing so. And then next week, we are going to begin our career chat. So we're hoping that conversations with extraordinary leaders like Tonise inspire you to think about how you can be accelerating impact in this world. And for those of you who are thinking about what that means for your career, it's your chance to talk to people that are already at that intersection of profit and purpose. Let me just share what we still have coming up on the Big Ideas front. Tomorrow, we'll have a power chat with Renetta McCann, who I'm betting Tonise knows from their shared leadership in this world of branding and media and marketing. Renetta is currently the Chief Inclusion Experience Officer at the Publicis Group, and she'll be talking about delivering on inclusion. And then on Thursday, we'll be talking with Mamadou Aboussar, who runs one of the leading firms in the world on ESG, and he'll be describing his journey to the top of the impact investing and ESG community. We have already heard from Diana Aviv, the former CEO of Feeding America and the independent sector, from Michael McAfee, who's the president of the Policy Link and is advancing corporate racial equity, from Amy Eubanks Davis, who is the CEO and founder at Braven, from Tony Hunter, the CEO at McClatchy, from Xavier Ramey, the CEO of Justice Informed, from Rashad Tabakawala, the author of Restoring the Soul of Business. And today we are now coming to Tonise Paul, and we are so excited for her discussion with us about meaning in business and beyond. The conversation is going to be moderated by Renee Marangwe, who is the Director of Ecosystem Strategy and Analysis at LRNG. And she is also, much to our heart, a candidate in the Baumhart Scholars MBA. But I'm going to turn it over to another candidate in the Baumhart Scholars MBA, a senior manager at corporate partnerships at Feeding America, Bridget Carney, who will be more formally introducing them since she knows them both so well. And so, Bridget, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Seth. I am so honored to introduce Tonise Paul, the chairman of Energy BBDO and a director of BBDO Worldwide. Tonise has spent her career unlocking the growth potential of consumer brands and the businesses they fuel. During her 24 years as CEO, Tonise built an award-winning, leading-edge creative organization that energizes people and brands by making meaningful connections between them. Tonise's values-driven approach to leadership has resulted in a strong, positive, creative culture that has fueled long-term growth and enduring client partnerships with iconic leadership brands. Leading through times of extreme technological and economic change, Tonise drove transformation of the agency to the modern, integrated, global, multicultural, award-winning creative and production company it is today. In addition to her brilliant work in the private sector, Tonise is a passionate advocate for the underserved, serving for more than 20 years on the boards of the U.S. Fund for UNICEF Midwest Chapter and Off the Street Club in West Garfield Park. She recently joined as a trustee for Rush University Medical Center, inspired by their leadership of health equity. May I just say wow, and welcome to Tonise. And then moderating today's Power Chat is my peer in the Baumhart Scholars Program, Renee Marangwe. Another wow. Renee is the Director of Ecosystem Strategy and Analysis of LRNG at Southern New Hampshire University. LRNG is the social impact arm of the university and is focused on expanding access to meaningful employment and education. In this role, Renee builds partnerships with communities to create the conditions for learner success by providing engaging experiences at the intersection of knowledge and hands-on work. Now, Renee, I will kick it to you to begin this exciting conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bridget. And thank you, Tonise, for being here with us today. As we heard from Bridget, you are quite an accomplished woman. And I imagine that that was no easy feat, nor did you get to where you are professionally overnight. So, to further ground us in 3 to 4 minutes, could you please give us a brief snapshot of your journey to where you are today? Tell us about moments in your career and mentors who had a particularly influential role in your career thinking.
Right. Well, first, let me say thank you. I'm delighted to have this conversation with you, Renee, and Bridget. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Bridget and I go way back. And Seth, thank you for inviting me here, and for everybody who's joined. And looking forward to the conversation. So I'll start my journey where it actually started and introduce my original mentor, who was my mom. And doing that, I have to be sure not to get emotional about it, but my mom was the how I learned that leadership isn't a position. She never had that or means, but she was an incredible person of influence. And she taught, well, she led our family through a lot in our youth, but she taught me that there is really nothing, no problem we couldn't solve if we put our heads together and we stuck together. And inherent in that was a genuine, deep-rooted optimism, and also a sense of gratitude. So she made it very clear, first of all, first person to be grateful to is God. But no matter what hand you were dealt, there was always something to be thankful for. And I will say that that was the wind at my back as I went off into the world, and was the first person in my family to go to college and get a degree. And I worked my way through school. And I thought back then, to distinguish myself, I needed to be a really good student. So I went to University of Illinois, ILL, if anybody's out there. And I left there with 2 degrees in communication, name on the bronze tablet, and got my dream job at Leo Burnett in Chicago, and had an amazing 3.5 foundational years there. And that is how I know Renetta McCann, believe it or not, way back then. But then I went to BBDO, and as you know my story, I've only ever worked 2 places since I got out of college, which, you know, is very, very rare. But I just, you know, put my nose through the grindstone and worked my way up. By the time I had my first daughter, I came back and was leading the largest business at the agency, became the managing director, became the CEO at 38. I was in way over my skis. I mean, way over my skis. Talk about on the job CEOing. I was named to the worldwide board, the first female CEO on that board, and it remained that way for a while. And then I spent the last 24 years or so growing the agency, growing the client base, the geography, the capabilities, and the culture. And about 1.5 years ago, for personal reasons, I felt it was I needed to move into a different role. So I moved into the chairman role. And I'll just highlight something Bridget mentioned, because it's very meaningful to me. But that same 24 years, I was working with UNICEF. And this year, one of my most important things to do this year is to help, you know, help UNICEF fund 2 billion vaccinations around this globe to quell this horrible pandemic that we have. And so that's my executive summary on a gazillion years.
Thank you, Tonise. That is really inspirational. And it really resonated with me how you started with your family and your mom. You know, I don't often associate that with our professional, but even when I think back to my own sort of leadership goals, they really do stem from my mom. I remember learning that she purchased her first home while making $9 an hour. And I always think about the grit and perseverance it took for her to achieve that. So thank you for that. Okay, and so now you are chairperson of Energy BBDO, and you've said that in this role, you're going to focus on mentoring, coaching, and representing the agency externally to drive increased knowledge and respect for Energy BBDO within the community. And you said this back in 2019 into early 2020, so that was before the pandemic, before record unemployment, and before the murder of George Floyd and the resulting push for social justice. Can you tell us why these tasks were prioritized for Energy BBDO and walk us through what these efforts have looked like over the past year? Maybe share some key learnings, successes, and even failures.
Well, we have a deep conviction at Energy BBDO that part of our enduring success as an agency has been our culture. And it is most definitely why people tell us they come and stay, clients as well as our talent. So when, I think if I were to define the culture for you, I'd say it's positive, it's people first, it's values driven, very consistent over time when you have consistent leadership. So when it came time for me to move into this role, the question became for me and my successor, Jeff Atkins, who's amazing, was how can I, in this new chair, continue to help the organization preserve and cultivate the culture, which is so important, it's vital. And we came to the conclusion that best way for me to do that would be through coaching and mentoring of the executive leadership team. Now, had we had a crystal ball and had we known about the pandemic and what would ensue based upon the horror of the death of George Floyd, I think we would have come to the conclusion faster that that was the right role for me. Because from a learning standpoint, I will say we applied it to this crisis, but I learned it because I had such a long leadership brain. I've had other crises, different. The dot-com bust in 2002 when you guys were probably toddling, and the global economic meltdown in 2008 and 2009. I mean, those were crushing crises, not what we experienced in 2020, but at the time, what was happening out there was crushing us in here. So two things that I learned. One is that in the face of crisis, you do not change who you are. You double down on your values. And in the face of crisis, you don't change where you're going. You may have to tack, a sailing term, you may have to tack, but you actually use the crisis to accelerate the pace at which you get there. So when you get to the other side of it, you actually are farther than you might have, or further than you might have gotten. So what does that look like in terms of the actions we took last year? So on the front of doubling down on our actions, we're a very personal culture, as I said. So it was really about getting close to our people and seeking to understand what they needed from us in their lives and to do their jobs, right? Because everything got very confounded and the weight. So, and people responded differently. Some people handled things very well, loved not having a 4-hour commute. Other people were crushed under the weight of it. So we had to adapt rapidly to help individual needs. That's a fascinating thing. I think that this was happening to everybody everywhere in the world, but it manifests differently for individuals. So that same thing as a leadership team we had to do with our clients because it affected them differently. Some of them actually got growth from it, others got stalled. And then for each of our brands, there's a relationship with the consumer. So how does our brand need to help its consumers at this moment that none of us could even have fathomed would happen? So that's that first bucket, double down on your values. And my being there to help with that was, I think, really the best thing I could have been doing with my time. The second piece of it, accelerating where you're already going, I'll use as an example our DE&I plans, because I mean, that's the, out of that horrific breakdown, hopefully comes breakthrough. And I'll just give you a perspective. Our organization has a long-standing, well-known commitment to diversity. I mean, you're looking at one example of it. 25 years ago, a young female CEO. My partner then was our chief creative officer, African-American for 17 years. Subsequent to that, two Latino chief creative officers. So I think that's just telegraphic of the fact that we have a belief that diversity fuels creativity, and we need to be diverse in order to do the best work. So our teams, we already had our 2022 ambitions for our representation. We already had plans, but how could we make things happen even faster? So our head of DE&I, a woman by the name of Carla Boli, amazing force for good, has joined and is representing us at the industry level to help rewrite the principles for inclusive work in our industry. We did power talks with African Americans, Latinx, AAPI, LGBTQ, disabled people, deaf, even with formerly incarcerated people, to create cultural immersion and conversation and give people a way to activate off of this pain they were feeling. And then the last really critical thing is we had a plan. We view ourselves as culture shapers, not just mirrors. Our work shapes culture. So how can we do more to help out there? Well, we took our vision to our clients and aligned their objectives and strategies with our own in order to help our respective organizations and our collective work make a bigger difference. So all of that was going to happen, but it happened way faster. So that's why I chose that path.
No, that makes sense. And I think the point that really sticks with me is how you started internally, how you viewed your own people as the community, and you wanted to make sure that their voices were heard. You had the right training inside, and it wasn't just like an external thing, right? You started internally, which kind of gets us right into my next question for you, kind of shifting a little bit and talking about the role of advertising more broadly and the notion of leading with meaning. So what are your thoughts about when and how a business should speak up about a social issue? How can companies avoid woke washing, right? So for example, this is moving beyond a simple solidarity statement to actually taking action.
Okay, let's start with the first question, which is the when and how to speak up. And I honestly would never tell anybody when, but I will say how, and that is when it's in concert with your organizational values. That's when you have permission to. That doesn't mean you should. It just means you have permission to, if what you want to say and do is consistent with your organizational values. Values are the source of meaningful relationships. So if you act consistent with them, you're going to reinforce that relationship. If you act out of character, if you will, it's going to disrupt the relationship. So let me give you an example on this. And many of you may witness this as consumers in this great nation of ours, but the famous incident or series of incidents with Colin Kaepernick and Nike. So going back to 2016, Colin Kaepernick wanted to protest against police brutality and about social inequity. So he began to kneel during the national anthem at the NFL games. And this created just incredible polarity and more division than we already had. People felt very strongly on both sides of this. So Nike, he was one of Nike's athletes. Well, he stopped being engaged by the NFL at the end of that season. And Nike had to make a decision. They could have done nothing with him. They didn't have to leverage him, but they had him in the fold. But they, at the encouragement of their agency, they decided to lean into it. And they knew the risk could be very great based upon how people were reacting in the market. But they created a film with him and several other athletes, the spirit of which was, stand up for what you believe in, even if it will tear you down. And it was monumentally successful. And the reason it was is because it was true to Nike. They have a history of taking positions and being provocative. So it seemed like something Nike authentically would do. And indeed it was. And I mean, they while the market was going down, Nike's stock price was going up. There was an incredible positive reaction to it. So that's just an example of when a company chooses to do it. As long as the values are there, it's true to who you are, you can do it. The second question you asked was about avoiding woke washing. And I think my perspective on that is that it starts in the same place, which is the values, but don't just say them, act on them, do something about them, right? So I will give you an answer or an example here of one of our clients, and it's SC Johnson. This is an organization that is deeply committed to doing good for this world. And SCJ has for 25 years published a sustainability report. Now you say, okay, well, lots of companies do that. They're a private company. Yeah. They have no shareholders. 25 years of being transparent when nobody's making you, okay? So the CEO of SCJ is Fitz Johnson. He is a scientist and he is personally committed to cleaning up this world, to making the communities in which they do business, building them up and helping them. And he does that with his time, and he does that with SCJ investment. And the only other thing I want to say here is that this is very much in the company DNA, focus on sustainability, as well as his DNA. He's fifth generation leadership of this company, but I think it was it's his great grandfather. If you go back to the 30s, his great grandfather searched for a renewable source of wax in the 1930s, because at the time they were Johnson Wax. So it talk about depth of authenticity. That's who they are today, is who they were. He's a champion of it. And so that's the opposite. That's the far other side, but you're not going to get accused of it when you've got that kind of a story and that many layers of truth around it and what you're doing.
Got it. Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think I'd like to see more companies sort of lean into that authenticity and adopt this approach and figure out how to become more proactive instead of reactive in their efforts to drive change.
Fair enough.
And to this point of driving change, over the last year, right, we've seen multiple injustices brought to light. Off top that comes to mind for me, economic and healthcare inequality, and myself, and I know my sort of echo chamber, but I feel like most people don't want the world to go back to how things were pre-pandemic, right? And there are growing calls to reset capitalism. We even saw earlier this year, BlackRock, they're pushing their investors to incorporate ESG more into their processes. People want something better. So how can companies and the business community respond to society's request to build a better world in 2021 and beyond?
Yes, that's a great question. I love it. I'm excited about this question. First of all, society needs to keep requesting it, and business will keep responding to it. And I have to say, maybe it's because of my clients, but I also tend to be a student of the business, but I think evidence abounds that business is already responding in profound ways. I actually think that the pandemic and the response to George Floyd may actually prove to be the tipping point for real sustainable progress that you are, and all of us are hoping for. I'm sure many of you have read the book by Malcolm Gladwell, The Tipping Point. Well, one of the 3 catalysts that he talks about is a powerful context. So I cannot imagine a more powerful context than the year known as 2020 and the circumstance that it brought forth. So I think we are having a tipping point. And I want to share with you a couple of things, actually a handful of things that I see as evidence of that tipping point. It'd be great for us to discuss further. First of all, the business case is mounting that there's a positive relationship between purpose and profit. And maybe the beacon example of this is Unilever. So I'll call it the first data point. So it was 2009 when the former CEO, Paul Pullman, took over Unilever. And he made it his personal mission. I want to get this quote: to galvanize our company to be an effective force for good. So he wanted to prove that what was good for the planet was good for business. And so from their corporate recycling efforts to brand level efforts like Lifebuoy soap, teaching children the life-saving skill of washing their hands, they started to act upon purpose in every facet of the organization. And that shift in focus turned around a company that was in decline. And in his tenure, they yielded 290% shareholder return. But most important, lifted their employees, lifted all their constituents. So that's a huge data point. And I think it was a beacon that started a lot of businesses in that motion. About the time the Business Roundtable got together and modified their principles, which was August 2019, Harvard Business Review published an article on this same topic, showing empirical evidence that purpose and profit go together. So I want to read you something that I turned up in my research. Okay. Using more than 1.5 million employee level observations across thousands of companies, we quantified purpose, aggregate sense of meaning and impact felt by employees of a corporation. In our data, we find that companies with high levels of purpose outperform the market by 5 to 7% per year, on par with companies with best-in-class governance and innovative capabilities. They also grow faster and have higher profitability. So anytime you're trying to enact this kind of change in the private sector, you need the business case, and it is growing and growing and growing. A couple of other pieces of evidence, and maybe softer than the one I just gave you, but social pressure is working. The example I'll point to here is the Academy Awards. I don't know if any of you watch the Academy Awards, but we could say that decades of glacial lack of progress, right, has plagued that.
They had Questlove DJ.
Exactly. Exactly. And they had, so a few years ago, the hashtag Oscars so white or Oscars so male, but in 2020, they announced new inclusion and representation standards. And this year was the most diverse Oscars in history. And it wasn't just, oh, they made some improvement. People of color had 39.7% of the leading roles, and women had 47.8%. So that's pressure, and that's tipping. Mm-hmm. Okay, couple of other things. Purpose-driven brands. So they are impacting our world, and more and more and more. So last Wednesday, my phone dings, Campaign Live, just an aggregate news update. 4 articles it wants me to read. These are the articles. Degree Inclusive, the world's first adaptive deodorant built with a diverse disability community. The second article, Bubbly and Family Equality Spotlight LGBTQ plus Path to Parenthood. Third article, Google follows the journey of a child with deaf parents. If you have not seen that film, you must just YouTube it. And then Dove turns attention to heavily edited self in latest campaign to help build women's esteem. So I point that as an example. That's one email, but you can see where it's starting to happen. And these are all very different kinds of companies. Okay, I have two more examples of tipping. You brought up ESG accountability, and there's this fabulous fact from Morningstar about ESG funds in the United States, and that they're just growing at a record pace. So, quote, reaching 51 billion in 2020, more than double the total for 2019, and nearly 10 times more than 2018. So that's a good sign of accountability. It's a good sign that people are investing in those funds. And my last point that I really want to make, because I believe it down to the bottom of my heart, is the single most important thing that is going to keep this moving is forming leaders for good. Because every leader has choices about how they run their companies and whether or not they're going to prioritize people ahead of profit and in concert. And I think that's what this program's all about. So I hope you guys will not just go into non-for-profit, but that you will be deeply embedded in the for-profit world, and it will change.
Thank you so much, Tonise. That is my goal. Well, thank you for illuminating, right, this idea and this notion of the tipping point and how we're experiencing it now, and for emphasizing, right, as a Baumhart scholar, how important this program and what sort of the charge that my peers and my fellow scholars and I have in front of us. I feel really excited and geared up to tackle those challenges. I have thoroughly enjoyed our time together. Thank you for an engaging and insightful conversation. You are truly a dynamic and inspiring leader, and I could think of a million other follow-up questions I'm dying to ask, especially about the tipping point. But I also want to give our audience the opportunity to engage with you. So I'm going to turn it over to Seth and see if we have any questions from our audience for Tonise. Seth.
Well, yes, we have lots of questions from the audience as well, Tonise, because it's been a fascinating conversation as expected. And Shalane Walker, you have the first question. So let me turn it over to you to ask directly.
Thank you so much. Well, yes, thank you so much, Renee, for moderating. And since I've really enjoyed this discussion, I'm also in the advertising industry. I currently work for one of the Group M agencies, Wavemaker, which formed from the merger a couple of years ago. And my question was, you received a great opportunity to be CEO at a very young age as a woman. And what are some things you think, as we're trying, be ready for that next role so we don't have to get ready? What were some things that you feel like you did that helped really prepare you so that even though it was challenging, you were ready to step into it?
And I admitted I was in over my skis, but I'll answer this, Shalane, from the standpoint of what I did once I got in the role, because I was very focused on the job at hand, which is why I was, I think, a little less prepared. I did not see it coming, and I'm not in that short a time frame. And so we talk a lot about mentors, but I will tell you, I learned from everybody. I had a leadership team. Some of them had vastly more experience I did. I leaned on every single one of them. I asked people, I did a lot of listening at the beginning. And I think that's really important to know, like, what's the need for that job? What do people need from you, And I didn't know the answer. So I asked people, what's holding you back? What are the things that will push you forward? Because what people want, and this is maybe one, it seems so obvious, but if you can never take your eye off of this, you'll be well served. People want growth. We are humans. We are wired for it. We want growth. So if you as a leader can stay focused on growth for your people, and I always say, when our people grow, our agency grows. When our agency grows, our people grow. It's a beautiful, virtuous cycle. You will be successful because you'll enable other people to do that. And I leaned on my clients. I had very gray-haired clients, white men helped me a lot. And I observed. I didn't necessarily, ask them what are the answers, but I observed what the really successful ones did. And I saw focusing on quality of product, no matter what your product is, right? And this thing that Renee highlighted, which I deeply believe in and is actually been proven out by the Harvard Business School, which is focus on your people first. When you focus on your people first and they are energized and they feel a sense of purpose, that extends, at least in a professional services organization, that extends to your client partnerships. And that is empirically proven to lead to long-term greater profitability. So people first. I didn't know that at the beginning. I just sort of sensed it, but it is actually a model. And it's called The Service Profit Chain, by the way. If you want to look up that book, it's a fabulous one. So,
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, I'll be calling you in a few years when I'm ready to step into that CEO role. And I'll be
You
getting all
got
your
it.
great wisdom.
Love it. Love to talk.
All of us look forward to that and believe that it will happen, Shalane. So it's a very fitting conversation for you and Tonise. Your next question, Tonise, is from Michaela Zausch.
Hi, Tonise. So first of all, thank you for your time today. It's great to hear from you and I love your energy. And so my question is, how do you take care of yourself to stay energized? So what do you do outside of all of your various responsibilities as, within your professional and personal life to stay so energized? I'd love some tips.
All right. Well, it's Michaela, is it? Michaela?
Yes.
Yes. So this is a fantastic question, especially through the COVID year that we've all lived through, because it has been so incredibly draining. And when I spoke to our agency about our culture not too long ago, I self-disclosed because I think we were all looking for a big answer out there. Like somehow there's something very turnkey that we could all do. And I do want to emphasize a point, and it was that we have to restore our energy. Like what you are asking is so critical because burnout happens when you just let yourself, you just don't take the time to re-energize. So how do I do it? I use the words, and I know it's frightening words. I mean, Renee, you've got 2 children at home and you're in a nighttime MBA program, but time, that's the scary word, right? It's like, nobody has time. Don't talk to me about time. So my approach is little bits of tricks. Maybe you can see I'm standing up. That's one of my tricks. If I were sitting down, you would have gotten a more, and I wouldn't have felt as good. So I stand up. I drink ice water first thing in the morning. It's before my coffee. I drink coffee. Would never live without it. But ice water goes through your brain, goes through your veins like crazy. I take moments of breaks to play Oculus. Each game is only 3 minutes. I text my aunt. I call my daughter. What else? I pray every morning. I write my 3 gratitudes. These are all things, none of these take any time, but they're amazingly helpful. So everybody's got their own little versions of this. And I was thinking, I read recently that reinforced this and they had a great name for it. I don't have a great name for it. I just call them my little cheats. like 3 minutes here, 5 minutes there, going outside. Huge, huge thing. It also extends your life 20 minutes a day. So anyway, I highly recommend that, especially right now when we're all trapped. Just little things you can do to sort of refresh yourself.
Thanks. Yeah, maybe you can call them micro wins or micro moments or something.
There you go. There you go.
See, and your branding and Tonise is perfect. You have a new branding leader here, Tonise. So our final question is going to come from Grace Mavali, and then we're going to move into our small group discussion. Grace, let me turn it over to you. Perfect. But you're on mute right now, Grace.
Yep, just double checking that. Hi there. I really appreciated Michaela's question. I think your energy is something I really admire, so I'm glad that you brought that up. Something we all can definitely learn from during this time period. The question I have comes actually from a conversation I had with a colleague. We're on this DEI committee together, and we're working on these initiatives. But really, the question we had was, how do you think we can have companies move away from thinking of DEI as just racial diversity at work to more like equity practices? Like what do equity practices look like at a company?
Oh my, I would ask you that. What seriously, when you say that, what do you mean? And then I can help answer the question.
For sure. So currently we're thinking of right now, a lot of it is, elevating like POC groups in our company or things like that. But then we're thinking from an equity standpoint, we kind of want to expand what that definition looks like, and that everyone at the company just feels really comfortable, and everyone at the company feels like they have, equity in terms of leveling up in the workplace. So was just thinking of underlying things that we can keep in mind when we expand the definition.
Well, I don't have an easy answer for that, Grace. I think I will say this, I think we're all trying DEI from off to the side to the center of the plate. And I think that's the spirit of your question. How do we really integrate that strategically into who we are so that everybody, and use the word feel comfortable? I mean, I have to say, one of the panels that Power Talks, I'm stealing your name, Seth, that struck my heart was talking to two women, one who was hearing impaired, and the other was in a wheelchair from a very young age. But the woman who was hearing impaired, because she functioned so fabulously, she gave us a window into what it actually feels like to be in the kind of environment we operate in and be hearing impaired when nobody could actually see it about you, And I realized how fast I talk. And I feel like how if you were at the table, if that woman were at the table with me on an ongoing basis, and I wasn't aware of that, I would be excluding her without even knowing that I was excluding her. Mm-hmm. So I do think it is so important as the nuances of the differences. And that's a little bit like last year when I was talking about getting up close and personal. I personally spoke to 45 people and said, and how are you? And because everybody's so different. So I think if you really want to get to an equity state, you really have to be genuine about understanding that differences take very, very different forms. And some of us, we're going to have epiphanies for a long time about some of the nuances of that. But how do we create an organization where we're looking for that? And it means the more we see it, the more you're part of us, as opposed to observing it as all differences. It's kind of the fabric of the place, and we're all in it together, and we're lifting all boats. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's just a little perspective about, what I've been experiencing and seeing if it helps.
That's perfect. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Tonise, for a truly powerful conversation. And thank you, Renee, for facilitating it and for bringing these topics in such a powerful way. I mean, I think that this is a role model of the types of conversations we should be having in every workplace in the country. We are now going to move into those conversations in small group because you have sparked a lot of ideas. And our goal for this is not just to be sharing knowledge, but to be giving you a chance to really reflect on it with one another in an intimate space. And so in a moment, I'm going to be opening up small groups. You have two very simple questions. Who are you? And then the next being what resonated for you in the talk and how can you apply it on your work and on your life? The rooms are opening now. Thank you all. We look forward to seeing you for tomorrow's Power Chat. And obviously a special thanks to Tonise, Renee, and Grace for your roles in today's really powerful chat.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Tonise. And thank you, Renee. Amazing questions and amazing conversation to both of you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Seth. Thanks, Tonise.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Seth. And thank you, Bridget.